Welcome to The Week in 60 Minutes. I'm Cindy Yu, the Spectator's assistant editor and your host this week. Coming up on the show, a look at the latest political turmoil. The local elections are here and Rishi Sunak faces threats from every angle. But he has a plan for survival. Katy Balls joins me shortly. And we'll also be joined by Andrew Neil on whether Scottish independence died with Humza Yousaf's leadership. Later on the show, the NHS has finally seen sense on defining biological sex. We'll discuss Prince Harry's brief return to the UK without Meghan, and we take a look at Radio 3's controversial schedule change. Before we get going, if you enjoy Spectator TV, do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just click the subscribe button at the bottom of this video and tap the bell icon so you never miss an episode. First up, for our cover piece, Katy Balls talks about Rishi Sunak's survival plan. Local elections this week are a perilous time for him, and he faces a growing group of Tory rebels looking to oust him. But he won't go without a fight. Katy joins me now. Katy, great to have you on Spectator TV. Now, as we're filming, the local elections are underway. What is the latest polling saying about the Conservative Party's chances?
So in terms of the polls ahead of the polling stations opening for the local elections, general election polling is not looking good. You have a YouGov poll out this week, which suggests that the Tories are at their lowest point. We're talking Liz Truss low, we're talking Jeremy Corbyn low, that type of equivalent. Yeah. And they're only just a handful of points ahead of the Reform Party. At the same time, you have all these rumours that Nigel Farage might announce his return to take an active role in the Reform Party, a leading role in a few weeks' time, which would send Tory MPs into even more of a spin. In terms of the local election results, it follows that given the polling and given where the party is, it's priced in they're going to have a pretty bad night. The question is how bad a night, and does it start to make Tory MPs reassess the leadership? Now, I think that estimates are potentially they're losing about 500 council seats, but I think where a lot of the focus is going to be is on the mayors. So Ben Houchen, the Tees Valley mayor, Andy Street, the West Midlands mayor, two Tory mayors going for third terms. Now, if one of them holds, the thinking in the Tory party and number 10 is Rishi Sunak will have enough of a story. Of course, I think that is probably correct, but I don't think that realistically the Tories could take too much comfort from it, because both Ben Houchen and Andy Street are really riding on personal reputations, something you have a bit more as a mayor than you do as a MP, and they're going for their local reputations. They're also being quite critical of the leadership. Some of the things this week, Ben Houchen saying, lots of the people who vote for me probably wouldn't vote Tory in the general election. Andy Street has not been too keen to have the C word, Conservatives that is, on his literature, and therefore, I'm sure, as someone close to Andy Street put it to me, don't expect to see Rishi Sunak invited to campaign with Andy Street in advance. But if Andy Street somehow holds on, you can sure as hell count that, Rishi Sunak is going to get there pretty quickly to try and say, look, the Tory party is actually doing fantastically well despite all these claims. But I think it would give him some cover. And then I think the other thing that's going to be really important is how does Reform do? Because I just mentioned that YouGov polling, and different pollsters put Reform in different places. And there's a question at the moment, which is where they are in general election intention polling is higher than they've really scored in any real test for the electorate. Now, they're not standing in that many places in the local elections, but Blackpool South, which is where the by-election is, held at the same time as the local elections, sparked by Scott Benton and a lobbying row. Reform is pouring a lot of resources and time into that area. It's the type of place who should do quite well. Everyone expects Labour to win. The battle, I think, as far as Tories and Reform see, is who can get into second place. If Reform are in second place, that's pretty tricky for Rishi Sunak. If the Tories are in second place, it's quite tricky for Reform, because people will start to say, oh, maybe this idea of, this party to the right is something, but do they have the ground game? Do they have the ways to get that out? So I think that's how it could shake out. And then, of course, finally, you have London, and all the polls suggest Sadiq Khan is, going to be pretty comfortably home. But yet Labour will say, we are very jittery about this, saying this, weeks in advance. They're worried about it because there's a change in the voting system to first past the post. And Tories will say, look, we don't think we're necessarily going to win it, but Susan Hall might do a bit better than you think. And I think the fact that Wes Streeting, a member of the shadow cabinet, has taken to quite a shrill attack line on Susan Hall ahead of polling booths opening, suggesting that, if she wins, it'll be a victory for racists, does suggest there is a bit of panic in Labour HQ ahead of the polls opening.
And it's the curious things about all these moving parts that the results are coming in at different points over the weekend.
Yes, and it does mean that how things look on Friday morning could be very different to how they feel by Sunday night. Now, of course, they would say this. The Tories say things will look worse for them at the beginning, and as you get further into the results, things could start to look up. Labour also say things are really tricky for them. So you're getting a lot of spin, but it does mean it's going to be pretty hard to say straight away, this has been a good or bad night. And I think that means in terms of Rishi Sunak and his positioning, number 10, Rishi Sunak and the party have always thought this is the biggest danger point for the Prime Minister. Of course, he does not have a mandate from the membership. He doesn't have a mandate from the general public. He's there through MPs, so MPs could change their mind. And I think that if there is going to be, potentially a move against Rishi Sunak, I think there's a big question mark over how impactful that would be, whether there are numbers for a confidence vote, but I think next week probably would be when things would start to move. You might get, probably some very depressing reads for Rishi Sunak in the Sunday papers about how awful the Tory party has done if the results are very bad. But it's a bank holiday weekend. MPs are back on Tuesday. And, speaking to a few, they say, well, we'll think about things over the weekend and then we'll talk to each other more on the Tuesday. So again, I don't think it will be an immediate thing in terms of how it goes there.
But for some in the party, they seem to have already decided that Rishi Sunak should go. What do you think they're looking for when it comes to these results, as to say, this is the go point where you actually activate this rebellion?
So I think there's clearly a group, the plotters, as they've come to be known, though you get into lots of trouble, you try and name who exactly the plotters are. But, I think a mix of former donors, some former aides, some Tory MPs, and some peers who have pretty much decided that Rishi Sunak is a problem, an albatross around the party's neck, and should have gone some months ago. Their question is, can they get more MPs to come around to their way of thinking? And therefore, I think you can expect to see, some stirring, some pushing. Perhaps, if you are a good plotter, what you'll be trying to do is to get a steady stream of MPs and figures in the Conservative Party to come out throughout the weekend and say, this situation is untenable. This is not enough, and try and build up this rhythm, this pressure cooker sense in that way. The question is, can they do it? But what they're really missing, to your point, Cindy, is they put out a policy blueprint. Some of the policies are not too far off what Rishi Sunak has said, but, they do involve quite a bit more money. So 3% on defence spending by 2027. They also talking about tougher sentencing, but that would also involve building prisons, which is quite expensive, and also staffing that comes along with it. And then also, settling with the junior doctors. Now, they're talking about a 10 to 12% offer. I think there is scepticism in government that the junior doctors that would go for that. But, some things like that. But so they have some policies they're suggesting. People can debate those. They don't currently have a leader to push that or to challenge Rishi Sunak. And that has been a problem for some time. The question is, can the results tempt a politician to come out and almost say they can be that person? And then can that person have adequate support? Now, the names most talked about are Penny Mordaunt, the leader of the House. She's obviously gone for the leadership twice before. I think that one of the arguments you'll hear in favour of Penny Mordaunt is she herself is in a very, she's not in a very marginal seat. It's just on the current polling, her seat would be quite tricky to hold. Though in her defence, she has made that seat pretty comfortable over the years. So perhaps she has more of a local mandate than some in traditional safe seats, which rely more on the brand. But therefore, could she, or perhaps Grant Shapps, who's also in a seat a bit like that, be tempted to try and move now because they're worried they won't actually be around long enough for the post-election defeat leadership contest? You've also got Robert Jenrick, who quit as a Home Office Minister. He's been doing lots of reach out to MPs and also speaking at various Tory events. Could that be a type of candidate? The person I think the plotters always wanted was Kemi Badenoch, but she has made it pretty clear, I think, to colleagues and so forth, that she does not think there is an argument for trying to change leader before the general election. But I think one of the key things in terms of how the next few weeks roll out will be, does someone step forward? Is there a cabinet resignation? Is that type of thing that would suddenly make things feel a lot more serious rather than these anonymous plotters giving various briefings.
But Katy, you write in your cover article this week that Rishi Sunak has a plan.
He has a plan. The plan is working, Labour tell you. Well, I think what we've seen is already the Rishi Sunak survival plan in part, which is in the past few weeks, the past week alone, you have had benefits crackdown, 2 parts of it. That's also a policy the plotters have been pushing. You've had the announcement of the defence spending boost, obviously in the future. So it might never happen if Rishi Sunak does not win a second term, but it's something that Tory MPs wanted to see. And then, of course, the Rwanda bill has received, is becoming law. And I think that has, if we think back to the Easter recess, that's what said, this, you say this is emergency legislation, got blocked by the Lords again. Why are you letting MPs go early into their holidays? Surely just push to get it through. But I think the timing of getting it through last week has had a bit of momentum. So Rishi Sunak can say, look, we've got lots of good things coming up the track. Please stick with me. And I think we're going to be hearing more of that. Look, you never know what's going to quite happen with these things. Last local elections, everyone, probably ourselves on Spectator TV, said, it's priced in, the Tories are going to do really badly. And then they did even worse than the Tory party chairman's expectation management. And it sent them into a spiral from which I don't think Rishi Sunak's government ever really recovered. So there's always a chance that things will be worse. Number 10 insists Rishi Sunak plans to fight on. He's not going to resign. He's not going to be pushed into choosing to go, which means if they want to get him out, there's going to be a real fight to be had.
So things could always be worse. Katy, thank you so much for joining Spectator TV. If you like that analysis, why not pick up an issue of The Spectator? You can get a 12-week subscription for just £12, plus a free £20 John Lewis or Waitrose voucher if you go to spectator.co.uk/TV offer. Next, is Scottish independence dead for a generation after Humza Yousaf's rapid downfall? Spectator Chairman Andrew Neil thinks so, and he joins me now. Andrew, welcome back to Spectator TV.
Thank you.
Now, it's been a dramatic week for Scottish politics, to say the least. Let's talk about Humza Yousaf to start with. How much of this was an unforced error on his part?
I mean, most of what Mr. Yousaf did was an unforced error. I mean, he went from error to error to error. Every time he gave an interview, there was another hostage to fortune. I suggested to some of the people close to him that every time a microphone was shoved under his nose, he didn't have to respond. But he felt he did, and he became not so much First Minister as First Pundit. He felt he had to kind of comment on everything. And of course, the ultimate error of all, and I think it's partly a result that he lived, as a lot of them do, in an echo chamber. He's only ever surrounded by people who agree with everything he says. He's never challenged within his own party. He's surrounded by people who just say, yes, First Minister, that's a good idea. And the ultimate miscalculation, and it was a miscalculation you could see coming towards you like a locomotive, which was that the Greens would be really annoyed if he dumped them. And he dumped them. And lo and behold, they were really annoyed and out for revenge. I mean, these are people that never expected to be in government in the first place. And they were really annoyed when they ceased to be in government. If he had waited for the Green Party to decide to withdraw from the coalition because, like many governments all over the Western world, the Scottish government was withdrawing from its net zero targets, then he could then have said, well, we're sorry to see you go. We've done some great things together. I will now continue as a minority government and hope on some things I can still count on your support, where we have a common agenda, above all on independence for Scotland. That would have seen him through. But no, he wanted to show he was a tough guy. He was taking the initiative. He dumped them. I mean, it's like a teenager knowing your girlfriend's going to dump you. So you dump her before she dumps you. And, when you put teenagers in charge of government, you get what we've seen in the past week to 10 days.
Indeed. Andrew, how do you think history will remember him in his time as First Minister?
Well, history will barely remember him at all. Humza who? He was only there for 13 months and he has no achievements to his belt. Just as his time in the Justice Department, in the Transport Department, and then in the Health Department. All three of these, he presided over a catalogue of errors, and so thin is the gene pool in Scottish politics in general, but in the SNP in particular, that every time he screwed something up, he got promoted to his next level of incompetence. So I think he'll be a footnote in Scottish history. And it's interesting because although he's one of these first ministers that will go down with Henry McLeish, whoever remembers him outside a few nerds like me, or John McConnell, or was it Connell? I can't even remember now. Whoever remembers them. So it will be the case with him. But even more important for the SNP is not only will he not be remembered very much at all, the giants of modern Scottish nationalism, Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, their reputations are in the dirt as well. So it's a pretty bad time all round for the SNP at the moment.
Well, Andrew, do you think that he'll be remembered as the First Minister who lost Scottish independence for the foreseeable, or do you think that that decline came before him?
He may well be blamed for the loss of Scottish independence, at least the ability to get to anything like it. But if he is, that would be unfair. He did nothing to help it at all. But I think it was lost before he became First Minister. I think Nicola Sturgeon saw the writing was on the wall, that there was almost nothing she could do. A second referendum was an impossibility for the foreseeable future. And that although there is still a substantial, at least the polls tell us anyway, there's a substantial support for Scottish independence, the polls also tell us two other things, which are just as relevant. One, outside the SNP cult, very few people are in the rush to have a second referendum. No one's gagging for it outside the SNP cult. And secondly, although they tell pollsters, yeah, we'd like Scotland to be independent, it doesn't even feature in even the 5 most important issues facing Scotland at the moment. If you ask people to rate the 5 most important issues, independence is not one. Indeed, in some polls, it doesn't even come in the top 10. So it may be a vague aspiration. It would be nice one day. But actually, at the moment, could we have better schools? Could we have better hospitals? Could we have roads that aren't covered in potholes? Maybe we could do some of that before we think of independence. So I think that was already happening. I think it's the reason why Nicola Sturgeon got out. Part of the reason why the SNP is beginning to bifurcate. The SNP used to be the most disciplined political party in Britain. It spoke with one voice. Now it's divided every which way. Alex Salmond has formed ALBA. The party itself is split between small c conservatives and progressive radicals. And I think that kind of bifurcation, these splits, indeed it's more than a bifurcation because it's more than a two-way split. I think that speaks to the fact that the main aim, the reason they get out of bed in the morning, independence, ain't going to happen for the foreseeable future.
Well, and also none of that is helped by the fact that Nicola Sturgeon and her entourage are currently still being investigated.
Yes, it never rains but it pours for the SNP at the moment. It's sort of death by 1,000 cuts. And that's part of the, how could you put it, the disillusionment or the degrading of the reputations of those who, as I've said, were the giants of modern Scottish nationalism. If you take Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, I always thought the London media overrated Nicola Sturgeon, as the London media usually does about Scottish politicians. But you can't take it away from her. She was a formidable operator. She was competent and formidable, and she handled herself well in public, and she led her party well. And of course, Alex Salmond had that huge reputation too. But that has gone. Both of them are in some trouble. Mr. Salmond won his court case, all the charges of sexual harassment against them. All of them, bar one, was not guilty. The other one was the peculiarly Scottish verdict of not proven. He won his case. But what we learned about Mr. Salmond by the testimony, which was not challenged by his side, meant he didn't come across as quite the kind of person that you would hope he would be or that he himself would hope he would be. And then, of course, we've got Nicola Sturgeon's years. Now, mired, almost become a sense of ridicule. I mean, jokes about the camper van, about the kind of in the line of duty type tent in her front garden. I mean, the Scottish nationalists take themselves very seriously. They don't like being ridiculed, and it's been hard to avoid ridiculing them when you've got a camper van paid for apparently by the SNP, parked in the driveway of Nicola Sturgeon's mother-in-law's driveway. I mean, why was it there? I mean, was it a getaway van? You know, was it a campaign van? Who put it there? Did the mother-in-law, who I think's in her 80s, did she ever even know was it there? Or maybe she thought it was an ice cream van, you know, which are very popular in Scotland. I just don't know. But it's hard not to ridicule them now. And of course, that upsets them even more than substantive criticism.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking ahead to the SNP's future then, Andrew, at the time of recording, John Swinney has announced that he will be standing, but Kate Forbes has yet to announce. The battle seems to be between them. Who do you think would be better for the party?
Well, I think it's interesting that other than John Swinney so far, and by the time this goes out, maybe Kate Forbes, we'll see, no one else has thrown their hat into the ring. And that in itself is quite telling. It seems that other than at most two people, nobody wants the job. They're not queuing up. And I think that's because they see it pretty much as a poisoned chalice. I mean, I think things are so far gone now for the SNP for the foreseeable future that why would you want it? Because there's basically nothing you can do to turn the SNP round in time for the general election, which we all assume will come sometime this autumn. They are cruising for a bruising in the general election. They're going to lose a lot of seats, and Labour will probably end up the largest party in Scotland once again. Indeed, the Tories, through quirks of the electoral system, they may even pick up a couple of seats in Scotland. It will be, come the election, it'll be a bad night for the SNP, and there's not much you can do about it. Then, a year or two later, you have the Scottish elections for Holyrood, and I'm not sure there's much you can do on that, because if independence is now effectively off the agenda, then what does the SNP run on? The only thing it can run on is its record. And when it comes to schools and hospitals and roads and infrastructure and Scottish economic development and company formation, creation of wealth, rather than just the spending of it, SNP's record is not that great. In fact, it's the opposite. File that under British understatement. It's anything but great. So that's not a record to run on either. And so therefore, I think it's perfectly possible that Labour could end up the largest party in Holyrood as well. So why would you want to do that? The attraction of John Swinney is that he's just a caretaker. He's done the job before. He was widely regarded as pretty useless when he did the job before, but at least he's a safe pair of hands. He's not a bad man. He's a decent guy. Put him in, let him be the ancient mariner that takes the ship onto the rocks. My advice to Kate Forbes, for what it's worth, is, and I don't know her, but my advice would be, don't do it, Kate. Don't do it. You are by far the strongest candidate to lead the SNP, but even you cannot turn things round this side of the British election or the Scottish elections. So stand back. You could take a job in government. John Swinney's already said he'll offer you one. You may want to think about that if it's a decent enough job. But the time to start again, the time for a ground zero, the time to pick up the pieces will be after these two elections. So let the people who have made a mess of things, a complete Horlicks of things, taken the SNP to where it is, let them preside over this rocky transition period to semi-oblivion. And then you can come in later and begin the long fight back. That would be my advice. I remember way back in 1997, William Hague, who was the up-and-coming Tory, he went for the Tory leadership. He shouldn't have done. He got it. It was a disaster for him. He never recovered. He never became Prime Minister. He never became Tory leader again. He had to resign after Mr. Blair inflicted a landslide defeat on him. I think Kate Forbes should be careful on that too. But we all know, Cindy, the lure of power for politicians is strong, and she may feel that she's in with a chance and she should go for it. But my tuppence worth, unsolicited, and ask for advice, is hold on, don't do it. They don't deserve you yet.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to join Spectator TV today. Now, this week, the NHS has declared that sex is a matter of biology and clarified the right for patients to have single-sex hospital wards. This is a landmark win for gender-critical campaigners. One of those campaigners, Debbie Hayton, is with me now. Debbie Hayton, welcome to Spectator TV. Now, this week, the NHS has officially declared that sex is a biological fact. Who knew? Tell us about it.
Well, yes, the NHS has come up with a consultation document that admits that sex is biology. And you've got to wonder if the health service was ever in any doubt that sex was biology, then we were in a worse mess than we thought we were.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of this is coming in an imminent refresh of the NHS Charter, where there are some changes surrounding gender and biology and sex. So tell us about what the changes are mooted to be.
Well, the changes are mooted to be going back to when you decide on the difference between men and women, looking at biological sex, which is what it's always been, that men are male and women are female. But the issue has always come with with transsexuals back to the 1960s and 1970s. So, for example, one situation is hospital wards. Where do you place a trans woman who may more closely resemble a woman than a man? And where do you place trans men? Now, I suspect in the past that local decisions have been made according to what could be called as the principle of least surprise. If somebody looks like a woman and sounds like a woman and is perceived to be a woman, then you place them on the woman's ward. And that worked. It worked really until the push for self-identification arose, probably around 2015, 2016, when instead of saying that a transsexual was somebody who had gone through a meaningful transition and was generally perceived to be somebody who was of the opposite sex, suddenly to be a trans woman, you just needed to make a declaration. So we had an increasing number of difficult situations, and it's untenable. You can't be in a position where a man declares himself to be a woman and then has access to women's spaces. And finally, the NHS has come round to realising that.
And so is the change going to be taking us back to the pre-2015 way of doing things, or is there something new going to happen? Because you write about this possibility of private rooms being mooted as well.
Well, it's before 2015, trans women who had been through a meaningful transition were placed on women's wards, and trans men who'd done the reverse procedure were placed on men's wards. That's what was happening before 2015. Since 2015, that the politics has changed completely. Now, looking at the situation and how we can handle this situation, we have a group of transsexuals who you'd say, well, what do you do with these people? Do you place them on the women's ward? And you can't really do that in these days. The situation's changed. Or do you place them on the men's ward and create a new set of problems? The answer which has been mooted is to find a private room somewhere, or find a side bay, or some such solution. And personally, that's what I've experienced since I transitioned, without fuss, without making any requests. When I've been as an inpatient in hospital, I've been placed in a side room and never really thought anything about it, because these places exist, and it's a solution, an ad hoc solution for the situation that arises.
So, Debbie, is the problem with private rooms then just a matter of capacity? Because I can imagine that the NHS, with its stretched resources, maybe doesn't have that option very often.
Well, yes, but this is the NHS. In other advanced countries, private rooms are normal. And in private hospitals in this country, private rooms are normal. And one of the hospitals which I've used since I transitioned was a new purpose-built hospital, which had mixed-sex wards, but within those mixed-sex wards, everybody had a private room within that ward. That's the normal way of working in other countries. So really, I suspect it's that the NHS has got a lot of legacy infrastructure which was not designed that way, and that's where issues can come in.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in reaction to this latest development, because it's the government that's suggesting these changes, some NHS bosses have accused the government of dragging the institution into a culture war. For example, Matthew Taylor, chief executive of the NHS Confederation, said that ministers would be better off improving NHS funding rather than talking about these culture wars issues. But, it just strikes me that they don't seem to think that single-sex spaces is a really real issue. It's not just a symbolic culture wars you think that ministers think is going to win the votes. For the women and the men involved here, it's a matter of safety.
Well, yes, and safety and comfort, and it's treating people with respect as well. If you must share sleeping accommodation with other people, then let it be your own sex. And it seems to me that that by telling the government that they're engaged in a culture war, no, that's not the case. It's standing up for people and standing up for people's rights, which is what the government's actually done here. But when it comes to the day-to-day implementation of the policy, then it comes down to individual hospitals. And a hospital manager is in a tricky situation if a transsexual comes in, perhaps a post-operative transsexual who has been transitioned 20, 30 years, routinely perceived to the opposite sex. Do they place that, if needs must, do they place that person on a ward which is with their own biological sex? And in that case, if that happened, it would cause a new set of problems, which is, as I tried to explain in the piece for the Spectator. But it's not the government that deals with those local situations. It's individual hospital managers. The fact is, there should be sufficient resources so that anybody who wants privacy should be able to request it. But that's a funding issue, and that does come back to the government.
So you mean you also wouldn't be comfortable with a situation where, let's say, a trans woman, born male, but has since transitioned, is put onto a male ward?
Well, you could say that. So, I'm quite robust. I'd be happy on a male ward. But it's the comfort of everybody around. What's important is how we perceive other people. That's what matters when we look at a person and say, that's a woman, that's a man. And if somebody is routinely perceived to be a woman and is placed on a men's ward, that's going to cause local issues in that situation. We can muddle on through, but it's not going to be something that would just pass unnoticed. And the other way around, a trans man who has transitioned female to male and has been taking testosterone and looks like a man, sounds like a man, and very much is perceived to be a man, would you place that person on a women's ward? Now, you can do, but we're creating a new set of problems, and those problems would have to be dealt with by local hospital managers and not by the government.
Now, Debbie, in the last few weeks, Hilary Cass released her review into the Tavistock Clinic as well as the NHS's gender offerings in general, finding that puberty blockers has such weak evidence that she was shocked that they were ever institutionalised. Have you noticed a change in the conversation surrounding gender since then? Because it seems to me like people, for example, Labour politicians are now much more comfortable to be gender critical in this way. You put yourself out there through your writing and through your work. Have you noticed a shift in the conversation?
Yes, I have. It seems that the default position shifted, the null hypothesis, if you would like. Before, the default position was everybody had a gender identity, and to argue against that, to say that biological sex is real, the perception of other people is real, and gender identity doesn't exist or need to exist, that was taking a specific position. What I feel has changed is that the null hypothesis, the default state, has changed, so that suddenly people who are arguing that gender identity does exist, gender identity is important. It feels to me that for the first time in perhaps almost 10 years, it's down to those people to prove their case that they're right. and not the situation for those who are speaking out against those things to prove that they're right. And that, I think, matters.
Debbie Hayton, thank you so much for joining Spectator TV. Next, as the King seems to be on the road to recovery, Prince Harry will be back in the country next week, without Meghan. Will father and son meet? Our royal reporter Alexander Larman joins me now. Now, Alexander, the King was out and about on public duties earlier this week. So do you think that the public can be reassured that his health is getting better, that he's on the mend?
Well, I think that people have been obviously desperate to see Charles out and about. And I think that what's done, especially with this week's very high-profile visit to this cancer unit, is he's shown people that he is wanting to resume the job, because certainly some of his family have been accused of not wanting to do the job enough and not being visible enough. And I think that whatever you think about King Charles, there's certainly a sense that he is like his mother, in that he's dutiful, but also he believes her adage that you've got to be seen in order to be believed. So it had enormous, symbolic importance that he was out and about this week. And also I think that it shows that clearly his doctors are happy that his health is sufficiently stable for him to be able to do these things.
Absolutely, it's very reassuring. And now Harry is meant to be back in the UK next week for the Invictus Games, but it's being bizarrely said that they're not actually going to be seeing each other, at least at the moment. What's going on with that?
Well, the trouble that we have is that there's brief and counter-brief from Buckingham Palace and from the Sussex camp and so forth. I mean, I can't imagine that Prince Harry wouldn't want to see his father. I mean, given that he literally dropped everything and came back to Britain as soon as there was the news of his cancer. So you start to think, well, is this out of inclination? Is it that King Charles doesn't want to see his son, or that Prince Harry doesn't want to see his father? Or is it, which I think it is instead, expectations management and briefing and counter-briefing, that if this doesn't happen, because obviously the King is in a very delicate condition, he's got to have this health monitoring done at all times, and you just think to yourself, well, it's not something that you can easily do. And so therefore you just have to ask, is there any chance that they will see each other? I would say it's more likely than the briefings are indicating, but who knows? I mean, obviously Harry's presence in Britain these days is always something of a mixed blessing, because if he's not suing somebody in court or suing the British government, as he's been doing recently, there's always a sense that he causes trouble. And I mean, if his fragrant wife is ever to accompany him, then things will get even worse.
Well, quite. I think she's not meant to be coming next week, is that right? And has she seen her father-in-law since he got his cancer diagnosis?
Well, she hasn't been to Britain in years, and I get the very strong impression she doesn't want to come to Britain, because he may be unpopular, but you can compound that unpopularity by about a factor of 100 when it comes to her. And of course, you can say it's misogyny. Of course, you can say that she's victim of briefings from various sources which are really unflattering. This might be true, but on the other hand, there is no denying the fact that the Duchess of Sussex has a degree of unpopularity which is practically unmatched by anyone apart from Hitler.
And there's reporting recently that her publicity team are trying to get her to have a better reputation in the UK. Have we heard anything more from that end? Is that a serious effort? And what could she possibly do to improve that image?
I was just thinking that a job as the reputation enhancer of the Duchess of Sussex must be the single worst job in the world. Because first of all, you have to deal with somebody who is not known for being easygoing and relaxed and all the rest of it. But secondly, you have a public that has made up its mind about her. And she had many years where people, I think, were willing to give her the benefit of the doubt, because there was a sense that she seemed to make Harry happy. There was a sense that some of you were different. She was a new face in the royal family. She was obviously a mixed race woman. She was really bringing a sense that the royal family had changed and that there was this evolution. So I think people did give her the benefit of the doubt. But then it was the Oprah interview. If you want to take a single moment that changed people's perception of her, it was that. Because, I remember watching it on television when it was being broadcast, and I was shouting at the TV, that's a lie, that's an obvious lie, how can you say these things and not be challenged? So I would suggest for anyone who's trying to restore her reputation has an uphill struggle on their hands, because apart from anything else, you can't change the past. You can't just wipe away the last few years. You can't undo their quasi-abdication, and you can't undo all the things that came with that. So I would suggest that she doesn't have any interest in Britain. It's not where her commercial fortunes lie. I mean, I can't see America Riviera Orchard being a bestseller of the, almost a Mason, that's for sure. So she doesn't need Britain, and certainly doesn't need her.
Yeah, tell us about American Riviera Orchard, which viewers might not have seen so much about. And someone compared it to me as like one of those what three words kind of combination where you just chuck some random focus grouped words in together to make it sound vaguely sensical.
Precisely. I mean, it should be America Riviera or Riviera Orchard, but not all three of them at the same time. It sounds like somebody couldn't make up their mind, just said, we'll have all of them. Well, for the uninitiated, and I envy the uninitiated who are watching this, Meghan Markle has a lifestyle brand that's called America Riviera Orchard. And the first thing that they have released is a pot of jam. And you think to yourself, to go from marrying, but I mean, you just think to yourself, to go from marrying Prince Harry in a ceremony that's been watched by untold millions all over the world, being one of the most famous, one of the most discussed women in the world, to launching your own jam. I mean, it's quite the journey, isn't it? And I mean, we're promised all these other things coming soon. And you just think, well, they're eminently resistible. And who on earth would want to be buying the America Riviera Orchard branded products? And she clearly sees herself as a kind of Martha Stewart. She sees herself as somebody who's going to do these things, and it's going to lead to her reputation in America because she wants to be a brand. I mean, she wants to be somebody who was making a lot of money out of trading off the royal connection, because that explains that. I mean, I lose track of what she's doing in terms of a Netflix series or Spotify podcast, but there's one thing in common with everything she does. None of it works. All of it falls apart. And you think to yourself, I mean, that awful Netflix series that they did, I mean, it was absolutely abysmal. And actually, what people don't talk enough about is that Harry's series on the Invictus Games was much better. I mean, it was much more watchable. He seemed much more committed. He seemed much more comfortable. And she wasn't really in it. I think that explains quite a lot.
Yes. And of course, Alexander, it can never be easy for the women who marry into this institution. And so, some people might have a lot of sympathy for those in that situation. But let's talk about Queen Camilla, because she really seems to have come into her own, and especially in dealing with the King's illness. I think she's become, would you say that she's more popular than she's ever been?
Yes, I think that what everyone has always seen about her is that she's a very human, very warm figure. She's somebody who's, I mean, like Kate Middleton, she's somebody who's been seen as, because she's not entirely of a royal family, she can come in and humanise it by essentially not having to be so enthralled to all traditions. But, I mean, I saw that picture of her the other day when she's visiting with Charles at the cancer unit. And there's this look on her face of absolute love and absolute devotion to him while he's speaking. And you can't fake things like that. I mean, that's not the sort of thing that, you could be told by your PR, give him a look of love and devotion. It's just something that comes naturally. And I think that in the case of Camilla, yes, I think you're right to say that she is at her most popular. And she has had a lot of help from image makers, and there have definitely been people who have been very keen that she's accepted. And sometimes I think this has felt like it's been foisted on the British public rather than a natural, organic thing. You will like Camilla. You will like Queen Camilla. But I think that set against that, I mean, what's people's objection? It's the fact that she supplanted Diana. Diana does not occupy the same place in public regard as she once did, because she died over 25 years ago. And obviously the series of The Crown has brought back memories, and obviously Elizabeth Debicki's uncanny impersonation of Diana made her once again understand why so many people were quite so obsessed by her. But you've got to go back quite a long way to really understand why Camilla was disliked the way she was and how Diana was regarded. So, I mean, time is a great healer. And I think that Camilla is now able to be her own person and she can exist on her own terms. And I think that's the best thing for her.
And finally then, Alexander, let's talk about Kate, because it's great to see King Charles out and about and doing relatively well with his treatment. What about Kate? Because her absence from the public eye is what fueled so much discussion only just recently. Is she on the mend? Are we going to be seeing more of her?
Well, I think that we have to be honest about this. I mean, there is no update. There hasn't been any update since she released that terribly sad video. And I don't think this is one of those situations where you can say that no news is good news, because obviously she's a woman, she's a young mother, she's a woman in her early 40s who's been diagnosed with an unnamed form of cancer, and she has disappeared from public eye. I mean, on the one hand, her husband is obviously going about and doing his events, so you have to hope that if his wife's condition was deeply serious, he wouldn't be doing those events. But then on the other hand, there was a real sense earlier this year that the royal family didn't have enough people in it. And I think this came to a zenith when Prince Andrew was front and centre at a memorial service that William didn't attend. And you think, if you're putting out the Duke of York, you've really got a problem, because a man so shop-soiled as him is not... I mean, it's as if you want to say, let people think the worst about the royal family, bring out Prince Andrew. So, yeah, I wouldn't say that was a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we obviously hope all of them a speedy recovery. Alexander Larman, thank you so much for joining Spectator TV. And finally, why is Radio 3 embarrassed of classical music? I'm joined by Damian Thompson and Igor Toronyi-Lalic to discuss the channel's new and not so exciting schedule. Damian and Igor, welcome to Spectator TV. Now, Damian, you've written your review this week about Radio 3, and basically it's changed around the timings of some of its programmes. What's the big deal?
One big deal for me is that the best thing Radio 3 has ever done for the last... Well, it's been in Saturday morning slot for, it would be 60 years this December, is Record Review. It's wonderfully learned survey of new recordings, plus building a library in which they compare famously all the different recordings available of a particular work. I mean, it's more or less impossible now, but it's so learned, but also funny, and it used to be quite bitchy in the past. And there's a touch of the old Radio 3. And now the music returns to the tragically compromised key of C sharp minor, which people used to make fun of, but actually it was fun, wasn't it?
It was great.
Igor?
It was vicious.
Particularly when it was vicious.
It's fantastic.
It was fantastic. And now that serious programme has been taken from its prime slot and moved to Saturday afternoons. Now, I know that you can hear everything on BBC Sound, so in a sense, it does make a difference, but it's symbolic because they've also taken Composer of the Week, which used to be called This Week's Composer, which is, for some reason, I think is a much better name, just trips off the tongue more easily. That's been shunted to the afternoon. And what bothers me is that there's a lot of good music on Radio 3. There's some good presenters, but they are encouraged to burble inanely and to talk endlessly about accessibility and diversity until you're screaming.
How can they
with
bring that
boredom.
up? You know, how is that relevant to music?
Because as far as they're concerned, the problem with classical music is that it's not accessible to new audiences. I haven't noticed a huge change in the demographic of people going to classical music concerts, despite, 20, 30 years of ear bashing and finger wagging on the subject of diversity. But if I can just quickly, what I did this morning was I took a look at Radio 3's schedule from 50 years ago today, because that's when it was at its peak. And just the ambition and the seriousness of it. There's a morning concert with a whole Saint-Saëns piano concerto and a symphony by Florence Schmidt. Then there's a documentary about Disney with Dilys Powell, who was really legendary film critic, and Daniel Burstyn, one of America's leading historians. Then jazz in Britain, Barbara Thompson's Paraphernalia. So serious jazz presented by Miles Kington, the wonderful humorist and jazz enthusiast. All of that in one day. Astonishing compared to the sort of uneasy, patronizing, self-conscious mixture that we get now. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that is the main problem. You know, people like Jules Holland are kind of... Jules Holland is like an unmusical idea of a musician, you know? And almost all the presenters, you know, Jess Gillam is the same. I mean, it's sort of, I'm kind of relieved that Michael Tanner died when he did, because it was just before this new shift in the schedules, and it really would have finished him off, I think. It is just the worst kind of watering down. It's a loss of nerve. You know, classical music has lost its nerve. It doesn't believe in itself. It needs to explain itself. No other art form needs to explain itself. Only classical music is there sort of endlessly begging you to like it. If the art form can't make its argument in the medium that it's created in, then you have no right in programming this stuff. You shouldn't be controller of this station if you don't believe in the art form. And clearly Sam Jackson doesn't believe in the art form, doesn't know anything about the art form. He's a complete Philistine. And you know, it's a problem across the board. It's not just the new change. There were other changes, other people brought in that just don't know enough about classical music. There's this sort of dreadful Katie Derham who comes on and sort of overemphasizes all the classical music composers' names because she knows that she doesn't know anything about them. So at least she can do the accents of their foreign names really well. She gets takes immense amount of pride in that. I mean, it's just basically there are stations out there that are hoovering up exactly this kind of diverse young audience that Radio 3 thinks it's going to get, which it won't get. NTS has 500,000 followers on Instagram, which is more than BBC Sounds. This station on a Saturday afternoon will program 2 hours of Kurdish dengbej folk music, okay, which is, an old 80-year-old man playing with a couple of gnarly reeds,
Only 2 hours.
Only 2 hours. I know. This is what Radio 3 used to do. You would hear boules in the middle of that. You would hear kind of weird folk music that's quite gnarly. That is the way you engage people, by being kind of comfortable in your highbrowness, not by being sort of desperate. And, it's people smell fear.
And one of the problems is that some of the presenters are really excellent. I mean, Petrok Trelawney, always been fantastic in my opinion. But look at Tom Service. Now, he presents this dreadful mixture on Saturday mornings. And he's an immensely knowledgeable music journalist and a very good writer, but he's just being encouraged to burble. And I was listening to him, I was actually noting down some of the burbling. And I mean, poor guy, he's perfectly capable of talking intelligently. He's just being encouraged not to. But his Service filling the gap between a Brandenburg concerto and a Chopin nocturne, it just sounds so contemporary, doesn't it? As if, well done, Buck. And that's the time-travelling power of all the fantastic performances I've got for you this morning. Like this one, A Dream, voice goes dreamy, of another world. And that's his segue into a Chopin nocturne. And then you've got...
But let's be... I mean, Tom is not the worst. And also,
he's not the worst at all.
He should be running Radio 3. I mean, Tom Service really knows his stuff.
Yes, he does, yeah.
He's a brilliant presenter when he's given his own... sort of space to do what he wants. It's Sam Jackson. It's this guy who's come from Gold.
And he's come from Classic FM as well, right?
Yeah, Classic FM and Gold. And he's basically...
And
smooth. He doesn't know anything.
So is that what's happening then, this Classic FMization of Radio 3?
Classic FM is a great thing. There needs to be an entry point for people who don't know anything about classical music. It's called Classic FM. There doesn't need to be a second Classic FM. The idea that somehow you're going to get these people is a lie. The concerts that I go to that have the least number of people, where they're the oldest, most decrepit people, are those concerts that are crossover, that are sort of smoochy, romantic, sort of classical, sort of this, sort of that, The ones that are hardcore, that are Turkish dengbej, you will get 200, 300, 400 people. I mean, it's just not
I went
true.
to Igor's Contemporary Music Festival a couple of years ago. It was absolutely brilliant. That's the most hardcore,
What do you mean?
modernist
You set one up?
Igor ran.
I run a contemporary music festival, and it does have a
It's incredibly exciting and an amazing audience.
Yeah.
Really
so that's the
fabulous.
question for Radio 3 then, isn't it? Like, how do they attract these younger people, new audiences who are not, older, without compromising all of this? Because yes, you can have some really die-hard fans, which clearly both of you are, but you're limited in numbers.
I don't think you would limit numbers. I think that all art forms, essentially attract people by being confident. It's like a person. If you meet a person that is lacking in confidence, that has no sort of, that is this sort of, doesn't have confidence in what they're about to say or what they are, then you smell that and you think, this is like...
You can also meet confident people who will just push people away because you don't want them. You don't like what they offer, So I guess what Sam Jackson is trying to do is to make it appealing to everyone.
Totally, but classical, if you don't think classical music has anything to offer, then you shouldn't be running the station. I mean, this is why he doesn't believe in classical music.
They tried it before when Classic FM was first launched. Nicholas Kenyon, I think it was, initiated some more disastrous imitations of Classic FM. And it worked so badly that they basically had to backpedal. If you haven't got the confidence to talk knowledgeably about the music you're presenting, then you shouldn't be presenting it. Or you certainly shouldn't be somebody like Tom Service, who's an excellent scholar, forced to burble. And that's what you get, burbling with finger wagging about accessibility and diversity. Because I say in this piece, there's like a BBC dinosaur that goes into a tail thrashing fit if it doesn't get its fix of crossover. And if I can just mention one thing, I nearly threw up. I heard a Radiohead song, Pyramid, sung by an exquisitely, meticulously even-song style choir in an arrangement that just turned I nearly tossed my cookies, as the Americans say. So horrible, so violent, and Tom Service was sort of cooing about how wonderful it was.
So, okay, have you guys heard about Sam Jackson running the proms and potentially bringing in a pop star as one of the headlines?
I mean, they've been doing this for years. They claim that the Proms is the greatest orchestral music festival in the world, but they seem to really want as many pop stars and bands and disco and stuff. It's fun. These are great musics in their own right. They don't really have a place in the greatest orchestral festival in the world. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. But also, there's a way in which there are a few things that they've introduced this year that are more in the direction that they should be going, I think. There's this incredible Saharan band called Tinariwen, I think that's how you pronounce them. And they're very popular, but they're very kind of hot, kind of musically impressive and interesting and not fantastically famous. That's the kind of thing that they should. There are world musics that are very kind of as sophisticated as any Western music tradition, and that classical stations like Radio 3 and the Proms should be championing. Instead, they're just going down this middle brow route of doing a different...
It's very interesting you should mention that because, of course, the big story last week was this Sam Smith prom, which is a preposterous idea. And there was a point on Saturday morning when Tom Service said, they said, they'll bring you the news. And he said, well, what's been the news about music this last week? Well, proms, of course. And then government cuts. And I thought, you didn't tell us there was a big row about the cringe-making plan to, force Sam Smith on a prom audience. No, you skipped over that and went on to government cuts. Always a safe topic on the BBC.
It's just terribly naff, a lot of this stuff. The idea that you're going to get new young audiences to this incredibly naff music is just for the birds. It's like crazy. It's an old person's idea of what young people want.
Right. Like groovy.
That's
Damian,
what happened
you write about
to Radio
the word
3.
groovy.
It's all getting groovy.
Well, what about the future of radio in general? Is radio not just a dying medium anyway? We do so many podcasts, for example, here at The Spectator. We did at one point consider Spectator Radio, but decided it was kind of passé. Is that the problem here?
Well, radio for me always was Radio 3 and nothing else. That's the only thing I wanted to listen to. Drove my family nuts. But that's all I wanted to listen to. And when they screwed up Radio 3, that was goodbye to radio for me.
Igor, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. I think that the problem is they are caving into trying to be sort of like competing with podcasts, but there's no need. Podcasts do a different thing. And classic, Radio 3 was doing a very niche but very popular. I mean, it was getting 2-3 million people at its height 10-20 years ago when it was doing all day Webern concerts. They did an entire day of Webern's entire works. Right?
Would Webern's entire works stretch a whole day?
Almost. I think it was from 9 to 9. Yeah. But that kind of thing wouldn't happen. You wouldn't get a Boulet's Day anymore. All the best reforms of the past have cleaved kind of in two directions. They essentially went more conservative and more radical at the same time. So they were giving sort of older listeners who just wanted hardcore classical what they wanted, and they were giving kind of, real nuts of new music and contemporary music and jazz and improv what they wanted. Now it's this middle stream, which is the worst, this muddy,
what no one wants.
Middle brow stream. That's all that Radio 3 is now, this sludge.
Well, Igor and Damian, thank you very much for joining Spectator TV. Or maybe we should start Spectator Radio 3. That's it for this week. Once again, if you enjoy Spectator TV, do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just click the subscribe button at the bottom of this video and tap the bell icon so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for watching and join us again next week.